Hello and welcome. My name is John Wubble with the All Nation line, and this video is a short preface to the New Tracks Build Along hosted by Jim Kellow. We were invited to supply our Waffle boxcar kit for a build along which was conducted just recently in November and December. Jim introduces David Schultz, who takes us through a four-part segment of how he went about to build this kit. I think you'll enjoy it. You'll pick up some skills perhaps. You'll see his methods and exactly a little imagination what you can do with a kit like this. And so we decided to take these four segments and stitch them together into one video so you could watch it from start to finish and perhaps apply what you learn to some of your own kit building activity or even scratch building activity. He'll introduce tools, he'll make suggestions, and I think he did a superb job with this kit. So enjoy.
Next, I'd like to turn to David Schultz, who's building the All Nation kit of the Waffle side boxcar. Remember, All Nation has just come back to life recently because it had been out of the market for some time. So we're happy about that. And Dave, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Jim. This is kind of new for me, so if there's any mistakes or if I trip over myself, you'll understand. A little bit about myself. I've been in O-scale for about 40 years. I met some other people that got me involved in it. So I've built a few kits over the years. This one's kind of interesting. I've never built a 3D printed model before. The filament's a little different. Took me a little bit to get used to it, so we'll share some of this stuff so you guys don't make the same mistakes I did. I had to replace some parts that I broke, but it goes together fairly well. So I guess we will start this. Now, like I say, bear with me here if I mess this up, but all right. Can everybody see that? Did that picture come up?
Yes, we can. We're good.
All right. These are some of the tools. The squares are kind of important for one part of it. Mr. Thompson alluded to making your own out of plywood. So I put those two plywood pieces in there, or you can use solid wood, whichever. That works perfectly fine too. I've got other types of squares. The Zappa Gap, of course, works really well with this filament. So that's the glue I've been using. John includes in the kit a piece of parchment paper, but I also use the wax paper that comes on a lot of those stickers you get from different outfits, with your address labels and stuff. That works really well for this also, but it'll help keep the, when you hold the parts together, it'll keep them from gluing to your mat. And the Dremel, of course, will come in handy for some things, or you can just use the chisel blade, but we'll go over that as we come to it. I still use this trusty old sander. This filament tends to melt if you go too fast. You got to go fairly slow with it as you're sanding it. Even with I've got one of the Ultimation sanders, and if you go fast with that, you will heat the stuff up and then you'll just get kind of a gooey mess. But I like to fall back on this one because the parts on these are rather big. So these come in handy. There's my the Ultimation sander. It's been a very handy tool. And these kind of clamps I got from Micromark. These come in handy for putting the sides in place. You'll have to come up with some clamps because the stretch across between the floor and the wall, you're talking about 2 or 3 inches. So if you guys, whatever clamps you have, that'll help hold it all together. So those are handy. And then I'm assuming if you're like me, over 60, you're going to need a whole bunch of these too. So different varying degrees of, I also have a jeweler's loop. So if I really have to get picky, I can get out the jeweler's loop and get in real close. But anyway, the floor pieces. This is the first start of this. You have to find the 2 floor pieces. John has pretty much got the stuff separated out in separate bags, and the 2 floor pieces, and it comes with a little biscuit. So kind of like in woodworking, they make those little biscuits that you put in there. There's a slot on the end, and you'll have to do a little clean out. I'll show that a little later. Where my little chevron pointer is pointing to are these ribs are very delicate. If you try to push the floor together with your thumbs up against those, you'll break them off. That is experience talking there. But luckily they glue back on fairly easy, but try to avoid putting pressure on those because they will break off. And here's a real simple, for truing up the ends. I just have wood blocks that are square, and I'll put self-adhesive sandpaper on them, and I'll lay the floor on the mat and put the block on the tabletop, and then just slide it back and forth gently. You can do it that way, or you can do it with the true sanders. But if you don't have those kinds of things, this works fairly well too. But I've got like 100 grit paper in there, and that'll true up those ends. Sometimes there's a little bleed off on the ends from the printing that need to be taken care of. That works pretty well. There I am using the true sander, and it'll clean up it. If you put the ends together without doing this, you'll see there'll be little gaps here and there. So you do need to clean up the parts a little bit. And then the slot in the end, I found that on one of the first kit I built, it wasn't a problem, but this one here, the slot had closed in a little bit. So I took the Dremel on the slowest speed, and I went down through there and cleared that out. But you're going to have to go in with like a razor saw and clear out, because it doesn't really cut, it melts. But it's not too big a problem. Go in there with your razor saw and kind of clean it out. But you just keep working at it until you get the biscuit to fit in there. There's the biscuit. I like to modify the biscuit a little bit. It doesn't have to be that square piece that you get originally. You can trim it up, make it biscuit shaped if you want, like a woodworking type biscuit. So I tend to, I cleaned out the slot as best I could, but the ends, of course, got rounded from the Dremel tool. So I just rounded the ends of the biscuit so that the biscuit would fit in there, and then simply put a little super glue on both halves, and voila, put it together. And you'll have to push from the ends. Don't push from those the ribs on the sides there. Like I say, they will snap off, but you can just push on the end. You can work a little bit, and then you want to have some kind of straight edge to make sure your floor stays straight. Now I just used my tabletop, put it down on the tabletop, and made sure that the ends were even across. And once the super glue sets up, you've got your floor put together. Then we move to the sides, and a lot of this is just going to be homework for you guys, the ones that are following along here. You've got to clean all the sides. There's 4 pieces, a right and a left, and then right and left of one side of the car, and then a right and left for the other side. If you flip it over, you'll see that this line where the pointer is pointing is where the floor is going to attach. So all of this peels off of here, which is kind of unusual. When I first saw the kit, I wasn't sure where to go with this, but that does remove. And then underneath that, you're going to find these little tabs, which are the support tabs for the printing process. Well, once again, you'll either have to use the chisel blade and go in there and remove those little tabs, or you can use your Dremel, but it'll melt. But I've done both. Both work. The chisel blade works well, but you got to stay clear. You'll get yourself cut with the chisel blade if you slip. And there it is, cleaned up, ready to go. Now, right down in that lower corner, and I think I have a picture here pointing to it, there's a little dip. I'm not sure what that is, but I take that out of there. And I think, anyway, there's a little dip here in the bottom corner. You've got a straight edge that goes from one end of the car to almost the other. And then there's that little part hanging down there that I remove. Take a razor saw or whatever and just remove that. It's not hard. And then you might notice at the bottom, when you clean all this up, that you can see through the car. This is not going to be an issue because the floor glues in there. And once the car is painted, you'd never know that was there. But the first time I saw that, I kind of panicked and thought I'd gone too deep. But it really hasn't. It will be covered up, so it's not a problem that way. Then I like to remove the grab irons. These have solid grab irons. It's a copy of what Walthers had done. And so John just 3D printed the car as he originally got it. And that's fine. If you guys don't want to remove them, you don't have to. But I take a chisel blade and I'll cut on the one side first. and then I chop the other side down, and then I go through and remove the grab iron. And we'll replace these with wire. And then I'll show that here in a little bit, but then we'll replace these grabs with wire. It'll give the model a much finer look. Then what I'll do is after I chisel those out of there, I use the round blade, the X-Acto round blades, and you can just lightly scrape on the car and remove that stuff right down to the car side itself. It's really amazing how smooth you can get it with those chisel blades. It also works on, you can see a little bit of this spider webbing that goes on. You can go around with that curved blade and remove some of that spider webbing and clean up some of the waffles, if that's a problem. Mine were pretty good. This one here you can see has a little bit of dimples in it, but you can go through and put a little Bondo on there if you have to. But I think that was the only one that I had that had a little bit of a deformity to it. Then we take our drill, and I've got a 30 thousandths drill bit that I put in there. This 30 thousandths in O scales is a inch and a half thick grab iron, which is kind of standard for the railroads. It used to be 1 inch, but that tended to be a little light. So they went to inch and a half. And then I think on the locomotives, it's 2 inch for the grab irons on the locomotives. So anyway, 30 thousandths, and you can still see the ghost from the old grab iron, which I used to line up my drill bits so I could get all the holes lined across. And you also had the ghosts from the nut bolt washer that was there originally too. So I just drilled where those originally were. Yeah, there I'm pointing. I got that picture out of order. But anyway, I'm pointing to that little dip in there that needs to be taken out. There's the side all cleaned up, holes drilled, ready to go. This is something you guys will have to work on for this next coming week. Like I said, there's a lot of cleanup on these parts. Then the end pieces. You can see here I broke off one of the tabs where the crossover platform will mount. Well, not too hard to find a piece of 60 by 80 thousandths styrene and glue it back in there. I use a wire brush to clean these parts up. It's kind of amazing. It works really well for taking that spider web type stuff off of there. And you can be fairly aggressive with it, but these little tabs that are sticking up, if you get a little too aggressive, you'll get what I got right there. Snap one of those off, and when they go flying, there's no finding them. So I just take a piece of styrene, I glue it in there to replace it. But if you're careful going around those parts, you won't have to do what I did. But that's how you clean up the sides. You make them look good. You'll have to clean up some of the flashing around the edges, which any kind of sanding block that you have, you'll clean all the flashing off of there. And then here's one problem you'll have to take care of. That piece that the pointer is pointing to is a little thick. There's a groove in the end. You can kind of see where the floor is going to fit into. Well, that piece that the pointer is pointing to runs into the center sill. So what you're going to have to do is cut away a little bit of the center sill. Now, originally on the first car I built, I ground down that hanger piece, but I didn't like the look of it after I got done. It was too thin. So instead, I'm going to cut away a little bit of the center sill to make sure this part will fit, and will fit squarely like this. You can see the floor is put into the notch. The end is square, and that hanger now fits in there because you'll have to, whatever you want to use, you can use the Dremel again if you want to cut that away that way, or you can use the chisel blade and just work at cutting it away. But just keep fitting the part until that fits in there. We'll worry about gluing this stuff later. Yeah, that's just another shot of the end cleaned up with the, there's the wire brush that I was using, a little brass wire brush. And amazingly enough, that'll clean those up. And this stuff is fairly tough. It holds up very well. You'd think that would scratch it, but it doesn't. It's amazing. But it'll clean up all of this little spider webbing that you see on there. And then you see the one little piece that broke off up there. And that was being a little too aggressive, but we got her cleaned up. And then these are the two pieces that'll fit the walls together. The car sides will mount into this. And once again, you'll have to do some cleanup. A little bit of flashing here and there. Some of it is support for the 3D printing. That stuff will have to be cut off and cleaned up. And I think, yeah, there it is cleaned up. The one on the bottom is cleaned up. The one on top is not. So you'll have to get that. And then the sides will glue into these, and we'll do that next week. So that is as far as this goes for this week. You guys got your homework cut out for you. A lot of cleaning, a lot of sanding. Next week, we will start gluing the sides together. We'll put the ends on the floor. And by the end of next week, we should have a fairly decent looking car. So I'll turn it back to you, Jim. Well, welcome back, everybody, to northern Minnesota, where many were cold, but few are frozen. Anyway, we're going to tackle this boxcar. Hopefully, everybody is where we left off last week. If not, you can go back, watch the other videos. So anyway, there's what the finished product is going to look like. I was going to give you a little bit of history about the car, but most I could find out was they started building these in like the late 60s. And the best I could learn was it apparently started with Press Steel Car Company started making these. And the idea was that you could put the load right up against the side of the boxcar and still be able to reach into those pockets and get the load locks. Where before they had to put the load a little bit away from the wall to get to the load locks. This way they could dig in there and grab them, and it became very popular. Pullman, of course, got involved along with everybody else who was building, and they were quite a popular car for almost anything. But anyway, that's most of that. So anyway, everybody should be about here. Got the parts all cleaned up, ready to go. You got those center sections. That's where the door will cover those up eventually. You've got the floor and the ends cleaned up, and we're ready to start assembling this thing. So first thing you need to do, and I didn't do it, I glued this end on before I did this, but you should drill for whatever truck screw you're going to use. I used 440. That it's right into that little pocket into these. You have to do a little cleanup to get the nut to fit down in there. If you're going to put in the floor, if you bought the more expensive kit, you get the nailable steel floor. So you might have to gouge that out a little bit with a Dremel to get the nut to sit down in there far enough so it doesn't interfere with the floor. But anyway, then put in whatever nut you're going to use. And I would recommend that you cover it with something, a piece of plastic, whatever. That way, if you seal the car up tight, the nut will never fall out of there. Otherwise, it could break and fall out, and then you're going to end up ripping the roof off to get that nut back in its place. Here we are. We got a square. Put the floor on there. You got the notch cleaned up, and a little super glue. Clamp it up, and you'll get your ends to be square. Try to keep these as absolutely square as you can. I realize the wall, the end, it might bow a little bit one way or the other, but once we glue the sides on, we'll be able to take that out of it. But try to keep this stuff as square as possible. You can use the wood blocks, or you can use the steel square that I have along with these clamps. All right, this piece here where the little flanger up sign is pointing, that's where we're going to put the glue on this piece when we glue the sides on. Now, one of the things you're going to want to do is after you get the sides on, is just assemble these parts, the two sides and this piece together, and then try to fit it on the car. If you find that your side is a little too wide, then what you can do is where I'm pointing there, you can start sanding away on these two edges. This edge here on the left side of the car and on the right side of the car, and you just take little bits off of each side and keep fitting it until the piece actually drops in. If you find that your side is a little too short, you can add to the ends. 10 thousandths, 15 thousandths, whatever you need to add, you can add to that end, and it'll once you paint the car, it'll work out beautifully. So anyway, this is how I did it. This stuff is tough. Like I said before, you really got to work at it to get it to. So I used some fairly aggressive sandpaper. I probably got like 100 grit in there to chew away with this, but you take a little bit off each side, and then just this is the other side. Of course, you have to flip it over, and then piece it together. And you can see where the bottom one, the gap is a little narrower than it was on the top one. And you just keep fitting them. And as soon as they fit, then that where I was pointing on these middle pieces, that's where you'll put your super glue. And then you piece it together, and I used a couple of clothespins to hold it. And they fit amazingly well. You should be able to line up all the edges and keep all of this square. It's pretty easy thing to do. Anyway, those of you that have the nailable steel floor, feel free to put that in on the flooring. You can, what I did was I started the one piece towards the middle and worked to the edge, and then the other one I can cut to fit. You may have to cut both pieces if you want to really keep it concentric, but I figure if you get past the door there, nobody's going to see it anyway. The one thing I didn't talk about is on this kit, you could probably make opening doors. I don't bother to do it. I'm not a big fan of opening doors, and it would probably have to be another show, and I'm not gonna, I won't tackle it because I didn't do it on either of these kits. But you might be able to leave out that centerpiece and come up with a way to design an opening where the doors will actually slide in the rails. But like I said, that's probably for another show. Anyway, after these pieces are glued together, this center section on this piece tends to be a little bit thick. And once again, my little pointer's pointing at the where it's a little thicker. So what I ended up doing was taking a Dremel with a drum sander on there and grinding that down so that was more even. That way you don't get a bow in the middle of the car. So, all right, then what we're gonna do before we put the sides on, we're gonna make sure the roof pieces will fit. There's little grooves on each end of the car that these the roof goes into. You'll notice there's little knobs on each end and they fit down in there. It may require a little bit of cleanup in there. I'm not sure if the one end here was a little bit off, so I took my rounded blade X-Acto and just kept scraping in there until the roof piece fit down in there. And there you can see where the roof matched up beautifully with the ends. That's what you want. You want that nice level piece. It's going to get covered up with the roofing material here eventually, but you want to make sure that those are even with the ends. And also you may have to shape that little piece a little bit. One of mine wasn't round, it was square. So I had to take a little sanding block and work on that a little bit to round that so it would actually pop down into that configuration. Anyway, there's the roof put together, one of the sides put together. Now, one of the other tricks I did here, I got my pictures out of order. You see this little white strip in the roof. I discovered when you put the roof together, and this is kind of the way it's designed, you'll have to go through and figure out, do you need a 10,000th piece in there, 20? I think it'd be rare if the roof actually went together and didn't need anything. John includes a biscuit that goes on the underside. The little raised piece on there is 40 thousandths. Well, I only needed 20 to complete this roof. So I used just regular white styrene and filled in that gap and glued the roof together. Once again, keep it as square as possible, find a straight edge, even an old board or whatever to glue the pieces together. And then you'll, in some of the later pictures here, I'll show you where you trim it up. So once again, there are the sides. You see the roof sitting on top there, getting ready to go. There's a picture. Here I'm showing if you put your sides together on the ends there, it was still just a little bit tight. So I ended up taking a sanding block and just grinding that side down a little bit to get it to actually pop in there like this. Get a good tight fit on that. All right. After you get your side glued on it, if the guys who once again ordered the high-end kit, you can add in the load locks. It's a separate piece that glues in there. Once again, I bought the lesser kit. I did buy one with this in there to demonstrate how those go in, but they fit right up against that door divider block and fit almost perfectly in there. So yeah, there was the 20 thousandths piece I had to put on the roof. So I got my pictures a little out of sequence here, but so I put in 20 thousandths. I was able to glue that in there, and there it is. I got it up against the block there to keep the roof straight. And then started trimming it down. You have to trim along the edges there to make sure the piece. And then here's that piece, that biscuit I was telling you about. That's a 40 thousandths wide piece. It was a little wide for mine, so I just flipped it upside down and still used it to help hold the roof together. It strengthens the roof to put that piece in there. And then you got to trim around these edges to make sure the roof, there's a little notch in the roof where the car sides will actually fit into. So you have to make sure you clear that out of there, whatever styrene you use, if you have to use any at all. Then you decide the roof pieces. Now, the black pieces on top there, that's Pullman's design. They had those pressed panels like that. Probably the others, pressed steel. You'll have to figure out which car you want to do, but these smooth ends are probably the other manufacturers. Like I say, I didn't do a lot of research on this, but I do know that Pullman was the one that came up with those pressed panels. But the rest of them are all these X panels. They sometimes will come in varying colors. It really doesn't matter. But what you'll want to notice on these is one edge has a rivet strip. The other side does not. So as you start gluing these down, make sure you keep your rivet strips oriented in the right direction so that you got a rivet strip on every panel. Once again, you'll have to take a sanding block and clean those edges up just a little bit. They might have some dimples or little rises here and there. Pretty simple to clean those up. And then you start in the middle of your roof. Put the first panel in right in the middle, and then you start working out towards the edges, adding more of the panels as you go along. And then when you get to the end, you decide whether you want to use that smooth panel or the Pullman style panel, depending upon the car you're building. And there it is with the Pullman on the other end. So you can super glue all those in place, use a straight edge so that the panels don't go back and forth. The last panel you put on there may overhang just a little bit, but that's not an issue. We'll sand that off to be even with the end. So it'll and then the neat part about this kit is the roof can remain removable. It snaps down in there pretty tight. I'm kind of surprised by that, but that works really well. Then we're going to move into the good old center sills. Now John's included, mine came with 3 different sets. You had some center sills that came out, or the draft gear that came straight out of the car with no drop on it whatsoever. And then the ones on the left there have got a kind of the most severe drop that he has available. And then he also included a couple of just extra coupler pockets that can be glued onto these pieces in the middle if you need a lesser drop. And then he's got some that, here's the ones with that's the most extreme offset that he has. And then these are the ones with no offset at all. So once you mount the trucks of your choice on the car, you'll have to decide which of these center sills you're going to need to put in your car. Now I use the Atlas trucks, and they required the offset draft gear. And here's a demonstration showing how the other pieces will slide right into there. So if you need that style, you just slide those in, glue them in. They're not going to be movable. The moving part is the gray piece. That whole draft gear will move, but this coupler pocket slides in there and glues in place. And there it is put in place, just demonstrating how that will look when it's in place. There is a slot right about where the truck screw goes, and that's what the sill will land against, or I keep calling it a sill. That's where the draft gear will land against that screwed when it goes in and out. So it will actually bottom out in both directions. These are the Atlas trucks that I use. They're the 70-ton truck, and it rides much too high. So what I had to do, and I discovered this, now you guys that maybe use Atlas more than I do, I'm a Pro to 48 guy, so I don't use a lot of Atlas trucks for my modeling. But I discovered that you can remove the screws from this piece, and that comes out. And then this is the pin on the truck that needs to be reduced. Well, I discovered you can flip that piece upside down and put it right back in the truck. And then it shows you how much to remove. So I took a Dremel and I put the screws back in, and I took the Dremel and ground that down. So it's even with that bolster. And now I can, with that offset draft gear, my couplers are just about perfect height with these. Yeah, as you can see in the picture here, I'll have to maybe drop the coupler a little more with a spacer in there, but otherwise it should be good to go. And so anyway, everybody start gluing your stuff together. Get the sides put in place. You don't glue the roof on, leave the roof open for now. Later on, if you want to glue it in place, you may, but we'll leave that off for now. But get the sides glued on. You want to make sure they're lined up with your ends. And we'll next week, we're going to tackle the old underframe. We're going to put all the piping in, put the brake cylinders, air reservoirs, all of that in place. So that'll be more of a full show than this one. But next week when we get together, you should have the sides on your car, the ends, and the trucks of your choice, and the draft gear slid into place and ready to go. So with that, Jim, I'll turn it back over to you. Welcome, everyone. We're back in the great state of Minnesota here, northern Minnesota. This week, we're going to do the underframe. We're going to show all the brake components, how all of this stuff works. We hope we got all these pictures in order this time. Usually I get a couple out of order, but let's give it a shot. So this is kind of where you should be. We're running out of parts. John throws extra parts in the box on some of them, but anyway, this should be about what you have left. The car is assembled. You've got the trucks mounted. Draft gear in place. We'll talk about that draft gear a little bit later. I also have a sprue of intermountain ladders and pieces. if you're not happy with the ladders on there, think they're a little thick or clumsy looking, you can use the intermountain ones. You could also remove the rungs off of the ladders, which are in orange down there in the bottom right, and put wire in if you prefer to do it that way. Many different options. So anyway, we'll start with on the draft gear. And I never liked the way Walthers had done it. They put a spring in there so the pieces bounce against it. Cushion draft gear don't work that way. They work kind of like I like that air cylinder on your storm door. You pull that out and you'll hear air going into it. And then when you release it, the air slowly releases and that makes the door close nice and soft. Well, it kind of works on that same principle, but the big cylinder that's in between is full of oil. And there's one piston inside there that goes to each of the draft gear. And there's a hole in that piston. So as you stretch the train out, the oil is forced from one side to the other. And unlike air, liquids will not compress. So of course the draft gear will slowly move out until it bottoms out. Well, I kind of like that same operation. So what I did is I just glued the two stops in there. You push it up against the truck screws, and then I glued those two blocks that you see in close to the center of the car there. And those act as stops also. And we will come back to that towards the end here. Then of course there's the little braces, because on the actual railroads, they don't want that piece breaking and falling on the tracks. So they have pieces that they mount to the center sill in case something does dramatically fail. The piece won't fall out onto the track. It holds it up in there. So I glued those braces in there. Your control valve, which a lot of people call the triple valve. Most air brake people would go nuts if you call it that. But anyway, the control valve, you'll want to drill 5 holes in the pipe bracket, kind of like on a domino, 2 above, 1 in the middle, 2 below, for the piping. And then you mount your pieces on the car, kind of where you want them. As Martin had mentioned earlier, the brake cylinder always points towards the handbrake end, and you should try to line it up with where the handbrake is mounted on the end of the car, so that the rods are fairly straight. The control valve is mounted towards the outside edge of the car. That way carmen don't have to crawl underneath if they have to change portions is mounted there. And then the reservoir is on the opposite side. They like to try to keep, the manufacturer like to try and keep these pieces straight with one another. They don't want a lot of bends in the pipes that go to these pieces. They kind of want to keep the air flowing as quickly as possible. And the more bends you have, the slower the air goes. So they try to keep them in line with each other. Sometimes that's not possible, but on a boxcar, it is. This is how they would do it. So there's where I mounted the pieces. So you can kind of get an idea where it is towards the center of the car. And yeah, there's just another view of the piece mounted. Apparently I took 2 pictures of that. And then for the end, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the brake pipe in. So on the ends of the car, I made these little pieces out of some 20 thousandths plastic. Just drill a small hole in it for the pipe to go through. And there it is mounted on the car. So you can see where it's gonna, you can kind of see where the brake pipes, I've got it partially mounted there. And so this is where the wire will stick out to simulate the brake pipe. I also mounted the handbrake piece on there. You guys will want to do the same thing right underneath where that pair of brackets are right there. The one thing I didn't do and I forgot is drill a hole in the bottom of that handbrake piece. Just a small hole where like a 20 thousandths wire will slip into. And I'll show you that a little later why we're going to do that. But it's a lot easier to do it before you mount it on the car, trust me. So anyway, to mount the brake pipe, now what I did is I glued little 20 thousandths pieces on the sill or on the brackets underneath to bring that brake pipe up even with the sill. And what I do is I make little U-shaped brackets, and that's what's going to hold the brake pipe in place. And on the real railroads, they're not allowed to weld a brake pipe onto the car. So the brake pipe always has to be held with some kind of, usually a U-bolt. Now, sometimes the brackets are angle irons that are welded to the floor. In this case, I'm just going to stick it on I've seen it both ways. And so anyway, you make these little U-shaped brackets. And I got my pictures out of order again. Okay, here's where the levers are going to go on this car. And what I do is I used pieces of 30 thousandths wire, and I drilled holes in the center sill to make the bracket to hold the levers. On the one on the right is the bigger bracket. That one I had to make. On the other end of the car, it's a smaller, and that one came with the kit. So I just drilled out the holes, and that one only requires one bracket on the one side because it basically attaches to the center sill on the other one, on the other end. And I just put a little piece of plastic underneath there to make the lever look even underneath there. So, and there I am. I've got the brake pipe mounted. That's 30 thousandths wire. Simulates 1.5 inch pipe, which is typical of what they use on manufacturers these days. And I just drill a hole on either side of the brake pipe. So I drilled one side, there's the other. And then I insert the little loops that I had made into the car, dip them in super glue, shove them down in there, and that'll hold those pieces in place. All right, here is what the pipe bracket is gonna is. I told you to drill it in 5 different holes, and this is the way the pipes come out of the car. Now the car floor, so this is basically like the car is sitting upside down. The 2 reservoirs come out of, there's on the reservoir on the car, there's two sides to the reservoir. You've got your service side of the reservoir and then your emergency side of the reservoir. Both of those will charge from these 2 bottom ports. So that's your reservoir is over. The retainer fits in the middle. And then on the right-hand side, the brake cylinder, that's where that one goes. And the brake pipe will come into the, what'll be the bottom of the brake pipe bracket here in the picture that I've drawn. It's on the top. And then, so the first pipe we're gonna run is not going to be this one, but I'm showing this is for the line going from the brake pipe to the control valve. And what I do is I'll use sometimes 30 thousandths. The brake pipe line coming to the pipe bracket is going to be 1.5 inches. So I used 30 thousandths wire, but then I took a piece of 40 thousandths and I soldered it on the end there to make a dust collector. I had a picture of it, but anyway, I trimmed that piece off, and then it makes it look like that little cup on the bottom of the pipe for a dust collector. And the first pipes you should hook up are the reservoir. So you basically run the across, and then to length. And if you drill your holes deep enough, when you drill these parts, you'll be able to trim this up fairly close, and you'll be able to slide the wire into the one hole deep enough that you'll be able to slide it into the other hole. And then you just super glue them into place. I didn't quite drill mine deep enough, so I had to keep trimming a little bit at a time until I finally got that pipe to fit. So, and there's the other one. Now I told you they didn't like to put bends in the wire, but I had to do it because I had to make room for the brake rods when they go into place. So I wanted to keep that pipe up against the center sill. So I just put a bend in there. Nobody really has to know. Now the retainer. After we got the 2 reservoirs in, we're going to want to do that middle hole, which is the retainer. So what I did is, once again, I glued a little piece like this on the side of the car, right near the control valve. And then I mounted the retainer in there. And you can see that on the left-hand side of this picture. And I just ran it out like that while the glue set up. I just put a drop of super glue in each of the holes to hold it. And I waited for it to set up. Then what I'll do is put a 90-degree bend in the wire, and then trim it off short, because the handles on the retainer valves are really short. All air exhausts through the retainer valve. And then here you can see I've got the first pipe lined up with the brake cylinder. And that, of course, would be the one on the right. Here you can kind of see I already put in the pipe from the brake pipe to the control valve, and you can kind of see that what looks like a white circle there. That's a dust collector that I had soldered onto the pipe earlier. So now we got to make the bleed rod, and I'll use little brass pieces for this. I drilled holes through it. They're about they're 20 thousandths. I think I drilled these for 30, so I've got a little bit of slop on the bleed rods. But now here's kind of an interesting little fact about the bleed rod. If your bleed rod has AB brakes or the old K brakes, they'll put a 90-degree bend in the pipe or on the rod. 90-degree bend. If you've got ABD or ABDW, it's a pigtail. And I suppose they did that to show the carman would know by looking at the car that it's got more modern brakes equipped on it. So they knew to bring either ABD or ABDW portions to put on the car. Anyway, just a little fun fact about the bleed rods on those cars. So there it is with the bleed rod mounted in there. And what the other thing I did is on the control valve, I'll drill a hole in the top there. And then I'll just put like a little O-ring in there. And then I run the bleed rods through that. So when you pull on those rods, it'll bleed the car off. It'll empty the reservoirs. It'll do whatever you need to do as far as if you're cutting out the car. You've got to have a way to bleed the air off. Or if you're switching cars, you don't want the brakes applied, so they'll pull that rod to dump the air out of the brake cylinder, but it'll hold her in the. Anyway, it gets a little in depth on some of this. Here I am just pointing out the retainer that is now on the car. And then you can see here's the brake cylinder line running in there, and along with our bleed rods in place. So that's pretty much all the plumbing on the car. So now we need to get our brake levers in place. And there's another view. You can see the retainer valve on the one side and the bleed rods on the other. So now it's time to put the levers in place. So I put the first one in there and clamped it to those two pieces that I put there to basically support the lever, and little super glue once again. And then I just clamped it to there. I did the same thing on the other end. I glued it to the spot where the arm will pivot, the fulcrum. And then I glued that in place also. Another little thing is brake rods never push the brakes on. They always pull. So when you design these levers, you got to make it so that everything is pulling the brakes on, not pushing them on. If you pushed, the rods would bend and you wouldn't get the application that you want. So in all cases, and you can kind of tell from the way I set the brake cylinder up, when that comes out, the middle piece goes over to the other rod, and that makes the fulcrum for this one. And then the end will be pulling along with the end on the other one will be pulling also. So both levers will be pulling on the levers for the trucks. So what I do here to simulate the rod going from the lever to the truck is I'll drill a hole right near the center sill near the bolster. And what I'll do then is I'll bend the wire to fit in the lever, and then I'll bring it over here and bend it to fit in that hole. And there you see it there. And that simulates that it went to the control rod. So, or the not the control rod, but the lever that goes on the truck to pull the brakes on there. And that's just kind of a simulation. I suppose there's somebody out there in the world who probably actually has working brakes, but I'm not going to that level here on this car. Then the next lever is from the middle of the lever to the middle of the other one. And that'll be as that cylinder moves out, it'll pull these levers. So the one going to the truck on the bottom of this white lever pulls the lever on the truck, and then the rod in the middle, of course, is pulling. And since the fulcrum is at the bottom, it causes a pulling action on that lever also. And then we just run a wire from that lever over to the same deal, drill a small hole near the bolster right in the center sill, and that'll simulate the look of that rod going to the brake lever on the trucks. So now we're going to make this fun little piece. I think you can buy these. I don't find them too hard to make, but I make a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square. And what I'll do is you can kind of see I've drawn about a 1/2 circle on there. And first I'll round that edge, take the point off that diamond, and then I will cut it out and we'll make this piece. I drill 3 holes. The one is where it'll attach to the car. And then the 2 holes, because that piece from the railroads is open, and I'll just widen those holes a little bit, and that'll kind of make that clevis that goes from the handbrake, the chain goes around that to the brake cylinder. And that kind of simulates that pretty easily without getting into too much money. And so we mount that on there. You can see it there by the end of the car. I kind of took a file and kind of filed a groove in there so the chain has somewhere to lay. I've also placed some spacers in here with holes in them to guide the brake rod over to the brake cylinder. So it'll come down from the brake wheel, go around that clevis. And then what I'll do is I'll just mount a wire from the brake cylinder over here near the brake cylinder, because that's attached with a chain, but I'll mount it close there, go to the bolster, and that's where it ends. And then I'll have one that runs from that other side of the bolster over to the chain. And so it's separate pieces. You don't have to run one continuous piece through there. So there you can kind of see where I poked the holes through there. That's where the rod will run through. So then we take a little wire, put a little loop in it, and I mount my chain in there and then close the loop. And then what I will do is cut this off, and that'll go into that, as I mentioned earlier, that'll go into the handbrake portion, that little hole you drilled in there. You'll be able to cut this off short and stick it up in there, and it'll literally look like another link of the chain at the handbrake as such. And then you can see it goes around that clevis, and then I've got the rod going in there. That ends right there, because there is a brace underneath that bolster that I wasn't going to drill through. And so we end it right there, and it just simulates that the rod passes through there. So there's the brake rod coming all the way over, and there's a little piece of chain that goes between that and the brake cylinder. And then when you tie your handbrake, that'll do that same pulley action that the cylinder gives, pushing on that rod. It'll pull that rod, which makes all the levers put the brakes on the car. So anyway, when we get done, we should have a complete underframe all built up, and then we'll work on the draft gear. Now, what I like to do with that draft gear, as I mentioned before, is I'm not a big fan of the spring in the middle. So what I do is I just keep sanding on it until it slides in there, not freely, but it's got a little bit of a drag to it. And I like doing it that way. And I'll put the couplers in there, and then the car acts like actual draft gear, because both ends will pull out as you're pulling a fully loaded train. They'll both pull out, but they'll stay out until you start to shove on the car, and then they both push in. And I like that action better than having the spring in there pushing that, as you uncouple from the car, it retracts back into the car. And I don't like that, because in the real world, they don't do that. If it's extended when you cut away, they stay extended. So that's how I like to work those center sills. So if you want to work on it, use some nice, real fine sandpaper, and just keep working on them. Sand them a little bit, slide them in there. But if they end up a little bit free, the other thing you can do is drill a hole through it and mount a little spring in there to slide along the sides. Anyway, I guess that's about where it ends. Next week, we are going to put couplers in place. We're going to put the rest of the ladders. We'll mount our trucks back in there, the doors, and we will finish this little project up. So, Jim, I guess back to you, and I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving tomorrow. Thanks again. Okay. Anyway, yep, this will be the end of it. We should have most of the car built. The roof is in place. You don't have to glue it in place, but you can choose to do so. Anyway, we're going to put on some of the finishing details of this, and so we'll start in. First thing we got to put in some couplers on this beast. So here's the draft gear. The coupler pocket is on the end, and you can see the chain for the handbrake and all that stuff's in there. So first thing we do, you can see on the coupler that was provided with the kit, I filled in the hole because I'm not going to have the coupler moving in and out. I'm going to have that solid because the draft gear is going to do that for us. So I fill in the hole with styrene, and then I drill a new hole that we will use to mount the coupler with. So there you can see that I've got it temporarily screwed into place. And what we're going to do is we're going to build up the outside edge with styrene to cover up the nut so you can't see that. So we get a piece. In this case, it was a piece of 40 thousandths. That's what it'll take to cover the coupler and that nut when it's all said and done. And here it is. I got the pieces. I glued them into place, and then I sanded around the edges to make it match the outside of the draft gear that is provided. And you can see I've marked where the hole is going to be by holding the coupler exactly where I wanted it. And then I marked it with a pencil, and then I drilled the hole out. And then I use a brass 256 screw for this operation. And there the screw is in place on top. Now I'm doing the same thing on top. I'm going to build up with some, I think that's 40 thousandths I had to use. I flatten the head of that screw a little bit, and I'll either use some contact cement or something to just lightly hold it in there because I'm going to cover all this up so you can't see the top of the screw. I hate the look of that, but that's my preference. So, yeah, my pictures are out of order again. Anyway, you can see the bottom where I added the pieces to hide the nut, and the hole drilled in the top. Yep, a little out of order. Anyway, there it is. I put a 20 thousandths piece over the top, and then I sanded it to match the rest of the coupler. So this is how it's going to look on top of the coupler. I got the car sitting upside down, but I laid the draft gear across there so you can see it. Okay, so then the coupler will be mounted. You'll screw that in place. Now on my car, I measured right next to the end, and you can see by the dial caliper, which is a truly handy item, and they're not terribly expensive anymore. I measured next to the ends, and then I went to the middle of the car, and of course you can see a little bit of a gap there, so that she's bowed out just a little bit. So I glued together some 60 thousandths plastic, and I trimmed it down to fit on the very end, snugly on the end of the car. And then what I ended up doing is glue them in the middle to pull the sides together just a little bit, and that'll square that car up nicely. In this picture here, you can see I've got the interior. I got the nailable steel floor. I've got the rings on the side of the wall for the tie downs. And this was the high end kit. It includes all the extra detail. The car probably should have opening doors so you can actually see that stuff. I'm going to have the roof removable on this one, so it won't be such a problem. But that would be probably a whole other show to show how to make those with opening doors. Anyway, I'm going to build the kit as it comes in the box. Next, we got to put on some of the rails for the boxcar door to travel on. These come with notches for the bottom, and you'll notice all of this. This takes a little bit of filing. You got to take your files and go through and clean up those boxes, and then keep test fitting to get everything to fit. As you can see, on towards the left there, the squares are getting a little bit off, but it's not too big a deal to take a little needle file and go in there and just widen that up a little bit to get those to fit. Takes a little bit practice to get all of them to fit properly, but when you're done, it'll look like that. And you try to keep it square. I glued one time and it bowed out on me a little bit, and I wasn't paying attention, so I had to break it all off there and do it again. But anyway, we got her on nice and straight, so that'll look good on the doors. And then you glue the top rail in place, and that one's pretty simple. It just goes across the top. You've got to stop on the ends, so you try to line it up with the stops. Otherwise, your stops are going to be off. But anyway, if you look down the car, you can see the stops line up, and you glue that piece in, and you just repeat it on the other side. Do the same thing with the other side, and then you've got that in place. The ladders. Now, I mentioned you could use some intermountain ladders if you want a much finer look, but I'm going to try and stick with using the material that came with the car. Now, I wasn't completely happy with that. A guy could remove those, put in a piece of wire, but I found that this stuff is fairly sturdy, and I'm able to take a Dremel and go in there and grind some of that out of there. I actually used a cutoff wheel and just lightly went back and forth on that until I got the rung slimmed up a little bit. And then I took a file to finish it off. And this filament really is some tough stuff. It's kind of amazing how well that worked. Then, of course, and the one thing, I don't know if the instructions talk about this. I kind of read through the instruction one time, but my father taught me once that instructions are just another man's opinion. So anyway, there is the crossover platform on the ends of the cars. There's a railing that goes between the ladders. So I drilled a hole in about a 20 thousandths hole on the one end of the ladder. And you can see them matched up here. The holes, of course, when the ladders are parted, the grab iron will go all the way across the end of the car, and it gives something for the train crew to hang on to when they're crossing over between ends of the car. So we've got our ladders, all the rungs are trimmed up, got the holes drilled, and these are the crossover platforms. Now, I got really kind of bored one night, and I noticed on the back sides of these, there's little dimples. So I took a drill bit, 20,000 drill bit, and a needle file or a holder, and I drilled all those holes out. And you really have got to be bored to do this kind of stuff, or really, really kind of crazy. But anyway, I drilled those out, sanded them, had to do it a couple times, then go through with an X-Acto knife and just clean the hole out a little bit, because you get a little bit of fuzz in there and such. And I find that a brand new sharp number 11 will go in there and you just twirl it a little bit and it'll clean those holes up pretty well. And then of course, you've got your handbrake chain that gets in the way. So you've got to make this notch in one of the end platforms so that the chain will drop down through there. I don't think it mentions that in the directions, but then I don't know how many people are actually going to go through the trouble of putting in a handbrake chain and all that. But for those who like to do it, like myself, that's a necessary item. So there it is. The coupler's in place. The handrails are on. And I didn't take my last picture showing the grab iron going between the, oh yeah, I did. It's in the next photo. Anyway, crossover platform's in place. That there's little knobs that stick out. That glues right in there. Real nice. Ladders are on. They fit right on the little knobs that are provided on the car. And then, oh, yep. I was going to modernize this car a little bit. And that was one thing that this was kind of a last minute adjustment. It gives you coupler lift rod holders, but they're kind of when the cars first came out. Later on, they made a different style of pin lifter. And I wanted to modernize the car a little bit into like late 70s. So anyway, I cut 6 pieces. This is all 20 thousandths plastic. 6 little squares. They're about, probably a 1/4 inch wide. By 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch works actually. But I think I went a little bit bigger than that. Anyway, you start gluing these things together into these corner pieces like this. And then I glued them on a piece of 20 thousandths and then trim it all up. So you end up with a piece that looks like this. Then you glue the other piece on in the opposite direction. And then what you're going to do is put that same brace on the opposite side of that. So you're going to, it's kind of a confusing picture, but you can kind of see what I've done here. So it makes kind of a W look or even a Z. Clean and trim that up and then add the little coupler lift rod holder into that corner. And then this will glue up into the corner of the car. And it gives you that more modern look that they use today, which on the railroad, if you step on that to get up onto the ladder, the railroad is going to write you up immediately. You can't be using things like, as handy as they are, there's nothing more handy than a coupler lift rod to step up onto the crossover platform. And yet the railroad guy has real heartache over that. So don't have your crew members standing on that lift pin when you get up in there. Now, I didn't bother to put in the coupler lift rod. The draft gear moves in and out, and I've got to kind of devise a way to make that. And I'm probably going to do the way the real railroads do, which is kind of an expanding lift pin. It's got to be either telescoping type stuff, or they even make a style of a lift rod where it's like a paper clip. And then the lift rod that goes to the coupler actually has 2 grips that hold onto that paper clip shape and slide back and forth as the draft gear goes in and out. I didn't get that far on it. You can see here I've got the wire put in for the grab irons on the side of the car, and you can see that I've thinned up the ladders on the ends of the car. And so here's the B end. You can see that I've got that grab iron up above, got the roof in place, the coupler is in place. I've got a coat of primer on it. I probably will this week start painting it. I'm not sure. I think I'm going to go with Rock Island. The handbrake I have on here is an Intermountain handbrake. The one that came with the kit required a lot of cleaning up, and I've got a lot of sprues from Intermountain car kits. So I just popped one of those out of there and stuck it in the end of the car because I thought it looked good. But anyway, that is the B end of the car, and it kind of rhymes with the end. That's kind of what I have for you. Hopefully you were able to follow along. I didn't go too fast. I didn't stump anybody, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to give me a holler at the end of the show and we'll go on from there. So Jim, I'm turning it back over to you.